Yeah, even in speaking, how do I get a really good presentation together? Because I personally don't enjoy public speaking. It's not one of my favorite things. I'm Janet Gregory, and I'm Canadian from Western Canada. I'm one of the lucky people that gets to spend a little bit of time. So, my hometown is Calgary. It's fairly close to the mountains, so that's a good thing. But I get to spend part of my time. We have a summer home in British Columbia in the mountains. So, I'm lucky that I get to spend equal time in different places. Today, I'm doing this from our place in British Columbia, so my view is of the mountains, and it's a good thing. What else can I tell you about myself? I love to travel. At least I used to. It's not quite so much fun anymore. But the whole air travel thing. Um, I went to university late in life, took computer science. So I've been in the tech industry since about 1991, which is over 30 years. And to me, that's kind of scary when I think about it. I've been working on agile teams or with agile teams since 2000. So that's over 20 years being in the agile part of it. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah, so that depends on what industry you're actually talking about. When I first went to university to get into tech, take my computer science degree, I went to school for the dollars. I really was kind of looking at my history, what I could do, and I thought tech was probably the best place to make money. But when I went through university and started programming, that's what I started as, I realized that I didn't want to be a programmer for the rest of my life. It wasn't what thrilled me. I could do the job, I could do it adequately, but it didn't it didn't create passion in me as such. Um, when I got into testing, so I went from programming to testing, I found that um, really I got excited about it. There was so much to learn. And so I think that excitement about it really appealed to me, the testing part of it. I also am a big fan of process, not necessarily heavy duty process, but light process, having things kind of in a little bit of, to make sense, a little bit of order. So I'm really quite passionate about that as well. And I think passion to me is what makes people good at their jobs. At least that's my opinion. So, what do I like the most about my job? Is I kind of talked about it previously, the passion. But my job is many things these days. I consult, I speak, I write, I teach, I test, I create too. For example, I'm working on a new course right now with Lisa Crispin. And lately, I've been in the role of product owner for a bit each day. And I know that I wouldn't want to do that all day. But I think my favorite part of any of these activities, no matter what it is when I've helped somebody. For example, when I'm doing a workshop and I can see the excitement in a person when they understand what they are learning, and the impact of what they could do, how they could apply it. That excites me. Or when somebody reads our first book and tell me they don't know how they could have done their job without getting through it. That warms my heart. And that really is what keeps me going. One time, um, Mike Cohn, I was talking with him, and he said, Janet, I have to show you something. And he sent a picture, and it was a picture of our book, the first Agile testing book. He said, I came across this when I was at a team the other day, and he said, I thought you would appreciate it. And it was a book, and it was full of sticky notes. And when you flip through it, it was full of highlighters and little notes on the side of the margins. And that told me that the person read the book, read it very thoroughly, and had lots of questions and thoughts about it as well. And that picture sticks in my head. And anytime I get really frustrated and think that what I do, or when I say something, or when I write something, that it's kind of falling on deaf ears, I go back to that picture in my head, and I think about, at least it's hit one person and they helped them. Um, and that's very powerful, very powerful. So Lisa and I have been partners for quite a long time. I met um, Lisa Crispin back in, but the very first time I met her, I think, was a conference at 2002. But my first introduction to her was when she was writing her very first book, Testing in XP, Extreme Programming. And that was when I first was in my first Agile team, and I was panicking because I didn't know what that really meant. I was on this Agile team, I was the tester, and I'd done some reading, but I really didn't know what it meant. And so I emailed the only person that I knew was in testing and Agile at that point in time, and that was Brian Merrick. He was one of the signatories on the Agile Manifesto. And so he wrote back and he said, well, I can answer questions, but Lisa Crispin might be better because she's writing a book. And so I had the honor of being one of their reviewers on that book and trying out lots of the things that she was talking about. And that's when we first started our relationship, our partnership. From that, after I met her, she kind of took me under her wing a little bit and helped me get into speaking. So I co-presented with her. She's probably one of the best people on earth to bring new speakers up and work with them. So I started speaking with her and doing some workshops, things like that. And then she asked me if I would be a co-author on her second book, which I almost turned down because I didn't think writing was in my skill set. And as it turns out, that collaboration and our partnership has lasted a very long time, 20 years. I think the best part about collaborating with somebody is being able to test your ideas, seeing someone take an idea and write it out. Also, by the pairing that we did when we're writing the book, being able to take turns being the lead, I'll say, because sometimes life gets in the way. It doesn't always allow you, 2 hours a day to write. Lisa and I took turns. If she had something going on in her life, then I would help out a bit more on the book and I would do more writing for that week or two, and vice versa. We really tried to stick to the schedule that we had laid out for ourselves. And sometimes that meant just taking on a little bit more work, helping out. So that collaboration is really important. It's really hard to work on your own. And I don't think that either of us would have been as successful if we had tried to do it on our own. Yeah. I think if I was going to say anything, I'd say keep an open mind. Look for ways to collaborate. Ask for help when you need it, whether it's from your teammates or community at large. Don't assume that you know all the answers because you never will. In our first book, we listed 7 success factors. And I believe those success factors are all still very, very true. And we've talked about it on our blog. So we keep talking about it. We think about it. But one thing I hear sometimes is criticism is that some folks think that people on agile teams don't think about testing deeply. And that's not true. Although, like on any team, some people know their craft better than others. But if you think about testing, period, testing activities, um, and think about the best way to carry those out, it's not necessarily the tester on the team, for example. It might be collaborating with one of the programmers. And I've done this myself, is to say, okay, we need to do some load testing. How are we going to do that? And then collaborating with a developer to figure it out together. And I think that keeping that open mind and looking for ways to collaborate is the superpower um, that people have on agile teams. Yeah, and your question here is for better efficiency. And I have a I use the word effective versus efficient because I think the word efficient gets people in trouble because they try to cut the wrong things. Kind of like the testing I mentioned before. It happens on agile teams just like it happened on traditional teams. Trying to get efficient isn't the best way, but looking at how can we be more effective? And I think every organization will find their own way. I personally like testers embedded on teams, not knowing that testers won't do all the testing, right? The whole team has to look at what activities need to be done and figure out how to do that. That tends to be very effective. Some teams I've seen, testers aren't actually doing most of the testing. They're being a coach or a consultant. And I've been in that role myself before. In fact, that very first team that I was on, as a tester on a team, I was more of the testing consultant, working with the programmers to figure out how we could improve testing. How could they do it better? How could we as a team do it better? Other teams, delivery teams, choose to have a tester that might do all of the exploratory testing but has input into the automation, and the programmers do all the automation. What I don't think works well is when the tester thinks they are responsible for all the testing, because they can't possibly do that. They become a bottleneck. I think that every organization is different. You might have really small ones, and they are going to behave very different than really large organizations that might need some kind of tests bed, some kind of test group. And I'm not going to say all testers because maybe it involves more than that, that looks for economies of scale, saying having lots of different devices, being able to test all of those, where you can't do all of that on individual agile teams. So, the consultant answer in me, it depends. There's not a best way, but there are some leading practices that work really well. Yeah, and I really have no idea about where agile will go in the future. I know that there's lots of different camps talking about which is better. Personally, I'd like to see people thinking about how to improve, whether they call it agile or anything else. what we want to do is don't stagnate, because if we get in this in our head to say agile is the only thing and we can't ever move, then you're going to get stuck. And the idea behind agile is that we are agile, we're flexible, we will change. So there are many teams now going to continuous delivery, continuous deployment. Some teams will get there, others will not. They don't want that extra work to get there. So I think looking at where do we want to be, how are we constantly improving, it's just a general shift. Will somebody come in the next 10 years and say, hey, I just found something brand new, I think this will work? They might. And I'm just hoping that people will be open enough to look at it to say, this is a good idea, not to say that'll never work, because at the beginning of Agile, there's a lot of people that said it wouldn't work. And now we know that it does pretty much in every situation. But again, not all. So I think it will be an evolution, which is let's just keep adapting. Let's keep getting better and better. Some people will go this way, some people will go that way. And that might be okay. I wish I had a crystal ball. That's really hard. I do have to say that I still very much enjoy testing. I don't do as much of it as I used to, but it's still very much part of my life. Kind of in everything I do, but when I'm thinking about testing applications, I still do that. Second to that, I think creating, working on, say, a new model, thinking of possibilities, challenging myself to say, what will work about this or not work? But also collaborating with others to get their opinions to say, how can we get this better? I like creating. One of the things I do on my own is I paint. I use watercolors, and I try to paint, and that creating can be carried over in a lot of different ways. So no matter what part of it is, it's that thinking part, the aspect of it. So if I could have done anything other than testing, when I look back at my early life, I got out of high school and I worked for the government. I definitely wouldn't want to do that. I did a lot of odds and ends for a few years when my children were little. For example, I started coaching gymnastics when my daughter was young, and in the sport. I wouldn't want to do that. I did some graphic art stuff for a while for a newspaper. I quite enjoyed that, and maybe could have done that for the rest of my life. But I'm not sure. I'm really not sure about that. I thought about teaching once. That was my original, when you're in high school and people say, what do you want to do? I thought, I'd like to be a teacher. And then when I got out of high school, I thought, no, I don't want to go to university for 4 years and teach kids. But as it turns out, I'm teaching adults now. That's part of what my job is. I'm not sure what I would have liked to have done, because I really enjoy what I do now. And I think that being able to change the variety of what I do really helps. Out of all the things that I do right now, I like doing the consulting, working with teams. That might involve a little bit of testing and things, but it's helping people to look at what they do in a different way. And I like to do that. So if I could find some other job that let me do that, that might be what I do. I like to tell people to be true to themselves. Find out what makes you happy. We're not all able to do exactly what we want in life, but kind of look at uh, what you are doing and find the joy in that if you can. But also don't be afraid to take risks. So I did a talk once, and it's probably on the Agile Testing Days YouTube channel, on pivotal moments, talking about things that changed my direction, right? Making choices. Like when I went to university, I had a couple of choices what to do, whether I wanted to take home economics, for example, or computer science. I took the hard way and took comp sci, um, and that changed my life. But there's a lot of smaller things like saying yes to when Lisa asked me to help her write that first book that we co-authored. That was a really risky thing for me because I did not think I was a writer and I couldn't see myself writing a book. But I took that risk and said yes, and it changed my life. But there's many things that people do, and sometimes it's scary to say yes, but I encourage people to take those risks if it's safe to do so. One of the questions I often ask myself is, what's the worst that can happen? Um, and then kind of go from there. So, other than that, don't be afraid. Take the risk sometimes.